The bandwidth for this episode of the Power Factor Show is brought to you by the Firearms Radio Network. Firearmsradio.tv.
Sponsored by Taylor Freelance, Rainier Ballistics, Hodgdon Powders, and JPL Precision.
Hey Power Factor fans, I'm Rick, and the 2014 Washington State IDPA Championship is approaching. Last year I did an episode about all the gear I was going to shoot for the year because I was going to shoot enhanced service revolver, and I just thought I'd do another little blurb. Although it's not a season-long thing, it's just the gear I'm going to be using in the state championship. I thought I'd just run through it just to give you an idea. In the past, I've mentioned that I have shot my bug legal Detonics Combat Master in sanctioned matches, and I'm going to do that again this year. I don't think I've shot it at a match this year, and I usually try to shoot it at least a couple. So I'm just going to run through the gear. The only classifier I've shot this year, if you're an IDPA shooter, you know you have to reclassify annually. And the only classifier I shot this year was in custom defensive pistol, so I was kind of stuck shooting that. The gear I'm going to use, I'm going to start with my belt and my pouches. This is a holster and a belt that I got from Fist, F-I-S-T. It's a, I think they call it a sport holster. And it's just the old classic Bruce Nelson, Bianchi, Avenger, you know, it's all, everybody makes a holster of this style. And this one is from Fist. It was made especially for the Detonics by cutting down the front here so that it accommodates the forward set rear sight. I've got a double mag pouch from El Paso Saddlery and a single mag pouch from Davis. So I will be using the third pouch for my Barney mag, and then I'll have my two mags, my reloads. And I've used this rig for years. I bought this thing, boy, at least probably 15 years ago. And it's held up pretty well. I don't use it a whole lot, but it's nice and stiff. No problems with collapsing or anything. And so it's time tested. I've used it quite a bit, so I'm going to go with that. My mags, I'm using Checkmate mags. I've got 7-rounders with full-length 7-rounders. One of the things about the Detonics is it uses a really short magazine that most people can only get 2 fingers around the front strap. And just to give myself a little bit of a competitive advantage, I've made these custom over-travel stops that also provide a little bit of a finger rest. And so those are my competition mags, and they're just conventional 7-rounders. These do have the patented Checkmate followers in a standard stainless tube, 7-round capacity. I'll be using those. And my load is kind of interesting. I generally shoot a 200 grain Bear Creek or a 230 grain Rainier over a charge, an appropriate charge of Clay's powder. And I was looking through my bullet collection. I've grown kind of wary of using the 230 grain bullets in the Detonics because the fast moving slide in we're going to do another episode about this later. The slide moves so fast that the magazine seems to not be able to push the rounds up to the top quickly enough for the slide to catch them to feed into the chamber. So I try not to use 230 grain rounds, and I never use 8-round magazines because the combination of the heavy bullet and the weak spring, the gun just doesn't feed reliably. So I was looking at my selection of 200 grain bullets that I wanted to sort through, and I had some older Master Blasters bullets that I've had laying around for a while, and then I had some Bear Creek 200 grain flat points, round nose flat points, that are labeled as being 445 Colt, which of course means they have a crimp groove. I don't even know if they make this one anymore. So this is the Bear Creek 200 grain 45 Colt bullet, and you can see it's got both a crimp groove and a grease groove. A lot of black bullets will use a custom mold that has no, for auto pistol rounds, we'll use a custom mold that has no grease groove and no crimp groove so that externally it looks more like a plated or jacketed bullet. But a lot of coated bullets are older bullet styles that have just had the black coating put on them. So now the crimp groove is in about the right spot in terms of getting the cartridge overall length where you want it. For a full round nose bullet, I usually load in the 1.26, 1.265 range for overall length, but with the flat points, it's more like 1.20, depending on how flat the meplat or meplat, I don't know if that's a French word or an English word, but you've got a large flat point on there anyway. And depending on how large that is, affects how long the cartridge overall length is. So I came up with an overall length that puts that crimp groove right near the case mouth. I was kind of concerned, do I want it just inside the case mouth, just outside the case mouth? And after loading a few test rounds, I got the good plunk when I used it in the in an actual gun barrel, and it fit snugly, but adequately, I thought, in the case gauge. So the only issue is I've never used this bullet before. And of course, one of the things you're not supposed to do is go to a major match using a bullet or a load or a holster or something you've never used before. But I was thinking last night, you know, I'm going to be at the range on Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and I'm probably not going to have time to hand load any ammo if I don't do it tonight. So 200 rounds of Bear Creek 45 Colt, and I think it'll be fine. The gun is not finicky at all. I've never had any feeding issues, but it again, just kind of in the back of my mind, you know, I hope it works. I have a few backup rounds with the Master Blasters, 50 rounds. If I have feeding issues, I can probably get through the stages that I'll have to shoot Thursday using those, and then I can do an emergency load session with some more Master Blasters. And of course, I could have just done that anyway, but last night it just seemed like I should shoot this bullet that I've never shot before. So don't do as I do, do as I say. Don't go to a major match using bullets you've never used before. I use my tried and true load, which is 4.2 grains of clays. And of course, because I'm shooting a 3.5-inch gun, in IDPA, your rounds have to make major power factor through a 5-inch gun. So I'm going to have to take my 3.5-inch gun to shoot the match, but I'm also going to have to take my 5-inch gun for chrono, because of course these rounds, while I expect them to go 850 through the 5-inch gun, they're probably only going to go 800 through the 3.5. And that's just the way the rules work out. You're allowed to use a gun with the maximum barrel length for the division while you chrono, so that if you're using a real carry gun, you don't have to load extra hot as well as use a short little gun to make power factor, which it makes perfect sense, except that of course you have to have a second gun with a long barrel or know somebody that has one that you can borrow. So the gun, which has been on the show before, but I'll just go ahead and show it to you again. Teutonic's Combat Master is the first of the ultra compact 1911 derivatives. One of the things that appealed to me about it is they're made in Seattle. Back in the day, my office in downtown Seattle is directly across the street from the old headquarters for Teutonics, which was in the Seattle Tower at Third and University. So if I walk over to the east side of my building, I can look right into the penthouse where Teutonics headquarters was 25 years ago. But 35 years ago, is that right? 30 years ago anyway. So it's just a really short 1911, and you can see it's got this weird cutout at the back for the rear sight. Back in the day, the doctrine was that you would thumb cock on the draw. I mean, back in the 70s, early 70s, cocked and locked hadn't been the assumed way to carry a single action auto. So the pistol was designed that as you drew, you would thumb cock it, and so that's why the sight is set forward like this. It makes an already short sight radius even shorter, but your sight picture looks rock solid because the sights are so close together. It's not the ideal competition gun, but it has run reliably for me. I can't remember, I don't think I've ever had a malfunction with it during a match. And I just like to shoot it. It's a fun little gun, and it is my carry gun, and so I do like to give it a little ringing out every year, every couple of, at least once a year. But it's a fun little gun, so I'm going to shoot that. And staff match, we're going to try to get about half the stages shot on Thursday, so that on Friday we can make sure that all the staff, we've got about 35 staff members, are going to be able to get through the match on Friday. We'll be good to go Saturday morning for the main match. And so that's just the rundown on my gear. Wish me luck, and I'll report back on how I did.
everybody. We thought we'd take a moment here and answer some questions that we've got here from viewer email and whatnot. It's been a while since we've done this, so I've taken some of the questions that we've had primarily targeted toward shotgun, and thought I'd take a few minutes here to answer them. So first question is by Paulos K, and he is asking, and actually these first, I think, 3 questions come from the episode that John and I did on cleaning an over-under shotgun. I think it was episodes 115 and 116. Those episodes have probably turned out to be the, I think, second highest ranking episodes that we've done in the program. There's a lot of good information there, and if you happen to own, particularly an over-under, more specifically a Beretta over and under, I would highly recommend looking at those. But even if you have something different, and a different over-under, it would still apply, or I would even say that for the most part, most of the information would apply to a pump or a semi-auto. So at any rate, go check them out. So the first question by Paulus is, hello, can I use paraffin oil instead of kerosene? I think he's referring to my recommendation or my comments about using or liking Ed's Red for my cleaning solvent. And just to go back, Ed's Red is composed of 4 equal parts of kerosene, automatic transmission fluid, mineral spirits, and acetone. So his question here is about probably the usage of kerosene, and he's asking if paraffin oil is the same thing as kerosene. The answer to that question is yes. Paraffin oil is the same thing as kerosene, or sometimes called stove oil. I use my Ed's Red combination. In fact, I've been using that to clean my firearms for many years now. I use it to clean basically everything that is metal or metal firearms, or even Glocks or plastic. But the one precaution that I take is I don't use that solvent on anything that has wood. And the reason being is that the acetone can sometimes attack the plastic or types of coating that they have on, like as an example, on my Beretta or on my Browning Satori. It has one of those like sort of polymer type finishes on it. Sometimes people refer to them as a bowling ball finish or something to that effect, but regardless, it's not an oil finish, and those finishes can sometimes be attacked by acetone and things like that. So when it comes to cleaning the stock or the forend on my over and unders, I use a combination of ballistol and mineral spirits, and what I use there is basically a 50-50 mix of ballistol and mineral spirits. And if I get it in the stock or anything like that, there's no problem. It doesn't attack anything, and I've had really good success with that over the years. So basically for in terms of the over-under for metal, the barrels, I will clean that with the Ed's Red, and for everything else, the receiver and the forend, I use the ballistol mineral spirits combination there, and it seems to work really well. I also have not had any problems with the acetone attacking the polymer or plastic, if you will, firearms like Glocks or the grip on my STI or anything like that. So based on my experience, I would highly recommend Ed's Red for your cleaning needs. Second question is by Mark B. Says, great video. Just what I need to help me clean my first new Franke. I was told or read to leave the chokes in while to protect the threads. You had the chokes out. That's true. When we did the video, the chokes were removed from the gun and John's 686, and I think what he was doing there is soaking the chokes and then cleaning the barrels. I fall into the same category as you, Mark. I like to leave the chokes in the gun when I'm cleaning the barrels. I make a point of always doing that. In fact, I've never cleaned the barrels without the chokes in the gun. Now, the gun is obviously, the barrels are made of steel, and that's a lot harder than the bronze brush, or even if you're like me, I like to use the Tornado, or now made by Hoppy's brush, which is a stainless steel wound kind of coil here. In fact, I've got one of them here. We talked before about these, but that's what the Hoppy's brush, which does a really good job of scrubbing out plastic fouling in the barrels. So point being is that those are not going to damage the threads if they come in contact with them, or should not. But I think the concern more is not so much about damaging the barrel, but the problem is the threads probably rip those cleaning brushes up quite a bit, and kind of gets frustrating. However, again, I'll go back to the point of, you know, if it's ripping the brush up and it's going to damage it, then why not just leave the chokes in and eliminate any question whatsoever. You won't have to worry about the brush damaging the threads of the barrel, and you won't have to worry about the threads of the barrel damaging the brush. So what I do is I leave the chokes in. I will scrub it out and clean the chokes, and if I really feel like I need to soak them or whatever after cleaning the barrel with the chokes in, I'll pull the chokes out, set the barrel aside overnight, let the chokes sit in a jar of, again, Ed's Red, and then next day screw them back in and probably run a brush down it again. So my chokes are always clean, basically with with the chokes in the gun using a brush, and I recommend doing that. You know, I've heard stories. This is kind of funny. I've heard stories of guys commenting that they have shot their shotguns without any chokes in there whatsoever, and I don't know if it is done intentionally. However, I've heard some guys claim, or heard about people who use that technique for shooting very, very close in birds, and I don't mean hunting, but close in as in, you know, sporting clays or whatever, where say the target's like 10 or 15 feet out or something like that, so they pull the chokes out so they don't have any effect whatsoever. And I would ask the question, well, why didn't you just go to cylinder? But regardless, people have commented about either doing it intentionally or doing it accidentally, of leaving the chokes out and shooting around a trap or whatever and not having any damage. So yeah, the barrels are pretty tough. I don't think you need to worry about it, but on the other hand, you know, why take a chance? So I will leave the chokes in when I do it. So next question here is by Jim H, and says, just discovered your channel and am very much interested, or very much enjoying your shows. I own a Winchester 101 over-under and wonder about differences in annual cleaning. Bought it new, have never had the stock off. Do you know of any good cleaning videos for that gun? Unfortunately, Jim, I don't. I looked around YouTube to see if I could find anything in terms of cleaning a Winchester 101, and didn't find anything. In fact, other than the, not to be tooting our own horn, but other than the videos that we put together, I haven't found anything that goes into detail about cleaning, detail cleaning, about any other over-under shotguns or shotguns in general, to the extent that we did it. So I would say probably, for the most part, what we showed in the videos of cleaning an over-under pretty much applies to yours. Some of the fine details, like, you know, in the case of the videos that we did, we removed the ejectors for, you know, more thorough cleaning, and not knowing if your ejectors are easily removable. You would probably have to do a little bit of investigation on that. If they can be removed, I would highly recommend, you know, pulling them and cleaning them every once in a while. I do mine probably about maybe 2 or 3 times a year, probably more like 2. In terms of annual cleaning, yeah, pull the stock off and get into the actual works there and give it a light cleaning. Don't, you know, massively go in there and scrub anything that you're going to knock anything loose or anything. Give it a light cleaning like we demonstrated in the video. Let it air dry. Use a light oil, maybe grease in the sear, and then put it back together and shoot it for a year or so. I cleaned mine this spring. I will probably shoot it through this winter, and then next spring pull my stock and clean it off. I was kind of happy this spring when I did pull the stock off. I didn't have a lot of crud in there or anything like that, so that's a good sign. However, again, I wasn't doing any shooting during the winter because of my my neck surgery, so that may explain a lot of the reason why it was clean. So we'll see this year, or I should say next spring, just exactly how clean the receiver is, or the lock works in the gun, since I'll have actually shot it for a whole entire year. So the final question we're going to answer here today is one by Dominic P, and it is a shotgun reloading question. It says, hi, my name is Dominic, and I have a question about shotgun reloading, if anybody could help me. Recently bought a new powder that I have never used before, IMR 700X, mostly because that is all I could find. Well, you and a lot of other people. That's obviously been a problem here for a lot of people in terms of reloading in the last, well, 12 to 18 months. I have tried different loads with it, that I had in my load data. I tried lighter and heavier powder charges, and it seems like the powder is not dense enough. When I seat the wad, the shot column is too short, and as a result, there's a hole in the finished crimp. Any ideas what I could try? I'm also using Remington gun clubs, Winchester 209, and the Winchester wad WAA12SL. Also have a MEC 600. Thanks for your help. Well, it's interesting that you should mention this. John and I are both going to be switching over to 700X, primarily from the standpoint that our other favorite shotgun powders, clays or international clays in John's case, or he likes extra light, Alliant Extra Light, are almost non-existent. And we've already talked about what happened with clays, primarily due to the fire that ADI experienced in Australia, and we mentioned before that clays is imported. From what I understand, the plant is back up and running in limited capacity right now, and if everything goes to plan, hopefully, cross your fingers and all that, that you'll probably see something in the first quarter of next year, or so maybe January, February, March timeframe or something like that. But I got my hands on 700X back in the spring because I knew I was running out of my powder, and realized that even by the time that that clays came back online, they have to fill all the back orders that are in. It's going to take quite a while before I'll ever see that powder again. So I got my hands on some 700X, courtesy of Chris Hodgson, and started just doing some very limited load data with it just to see how it performs. So I literally loaded up, I think, maybe 2 boxes of ammo, maybe not even that, but went out, shot one and around a trap, used the other one to do some chrono testing, was satisfied with the results, called it good, and that was the extent of my testing. But I recorded all the data, and we'll pick it up and start from there once I run out of clays. In John's case, John has been using it recently here to test 3/4 ounce loads. Without getting too detailed into that, John and I are probably going to do an episode here in the future, probably this winter, about doing powder substitutions and things of that nature. So look forward to that. But in terms of Dominic's question, in my experience, the one thing Dominic didn't mention is what payload he's throwing, how much shot, in other words. I have settled on, and I mentioned this before, I settled on pretty much 7/8 of an ounce for everything that I shoot. While I have shot 3/4 of an ounce before in the past for skeet and or 16-yard trap, I just figured it's a hassle to sit there and switch back and forth between 7/8 of an ounce, which is what I like for shooting sporting clays or longer distance continental type targets, and then switch over to 3/4 ounce for skeet / 16-yard trap. So I just said, screw it. I'm just going to load 7/8 for everything and call it good. It makes my reloading much easier. So it turns out that for 700X, if you look at the load data, there's a lot of 24-gram load data that's out there, which is very, very, very close to 7/8 of an ounce. So if you start with that, which is what I did, I found a lot of load data, and again, I'm using the same hole, the Remington Gun Club. I found a lot of load data using the WAA12SL wad, which is the also known, or in terms of the Claybuster 1100 wad, which is the 1 ounce wad. I'm not using that wad. I'm using the WAA12L wad, or the Claybuster CB0178 wad, which is the gray wad. We've shown these before in the past. And there was no specific load data for that. The other interesting thing is that with respect to the CB1100 wad, or the WAA12SL wad, all the load data also calls for a 0.135 shot card at the bottom of the wad cup to fill up the space, because of the fact that 700X is a somewhat dense powder compared to clays. So I hate messing with shot wads anywhere as it is, and I thought, well, okay, I'm going to try substituting the 7/8 ounce wad instead of the 1 ounce wad. And I felt fairly comfortable in doing that. We've talked before in the past about being very careful about doing any component substitutions, but it turns out that the pressure data for the CB1100 wad is very low to begin with, about 7,200 psi. So if I make a change in the wad, it may bump it up or down. Even if it bumped it up 1,000 psi, it's still a fairly low pressure load. As a footnote to that, a lot of the data that I've seen for other cartridges, the pressure between a CB1100 wad and the CB0178 wad for the same payload, for the same charge, but just making a different wad change usually ends up being insignificant. It's very close. Maybe a couple tenths difference in charge weight of powder to get the same velocity, but the pressures are very close. So I felt fairly confident I could make that wad substitution without getting into any trouble. So this is what I used for my beginning load data. Again, I used the Remington Gun Club load, 7/8 of an ounce of shot, number 8 shot, not that that matters. And I started with 17 grains of the 700X powder using a Winchester 209 primer, the CB0178 or WAA12L wad. And according to the load data, and this is for the 1100 wad, what they had for that, it should have chronoed about 1,260 feet per second. The pressure was 7,200 psi. Based on my testing, I ended up with a velocity of 1,271 feet per second, standard deviation of 12, extreme spread of 32, resulting in a high of 1278 and a low of 1255. Now, I typically like to load my shells around 1,250 feet per second, and that's a good target point to aim for, particularly with 7/8 of an ounce, because of what's called hot core patterning. The idea is that if your velocity is too low, your pattern ends up being very tight in the center of the core. By bumping the velocity up, it tends to spread it out a little bit. But the problem is, to a certain degree, is that if you drop the charge down and decrease the pressure, you'll end up with more dirt or dirt fouling in the barrel. To be honest, it was not as clean as a Clay's load, but it really also wasn't that bad either. However, in John's experience, it sounds like he's been getting kind of really dirty barrels, and again, that may be because of the fact that he's running a lighter load, not getting enough back pressure. But the other issue is component stack up, and if you don't have enough powder, enough charge, the right wad or whatever, your stack up will be too low and you will get dish crimps. I was pretty happy with the crimps I was getting. In fact, I'll point you to a discussion that I had on our Facebook page, which includes pictures of my final crimp that I did into my first test batch of loads. That'll magically appear here somewhere, or we'll also put it on a show link where you can click it. But at any rate, you can go and look there and see what I came up with as a final load or a final crimp. My concern is that if I want to decrease my charge weight to get the velocity down to where I'd like to have it, two things may happen. One, the pressure will drop, which will then potentially cause more fouling in the barrel. Not that that really matters, but on the other hand, you don't want to make it look like somebody dumped a coffee can, worth of grounds down your barrel or anything like that either. But the other thing is that the component stack up may not be as nice, and I may end up with dish crimp. So I may just have to live with running the load that I was, of being a little faster than what I'm comfortable with, but so be it. So once I go back to that, I'll try dropping the charge maybe up a couple tenths, see what the stack up looks like, see if my crimps are still good, see what the velocity is, see how dirty the barrel is, and then make a decision there of whether I want to stick with 17 grains or not. So Dominic, you might, if you have those other wads, the 12L wads or the 0178, the 7/8 ounce pink wad, gray wad. It's gray both for Winchester and for Claybuster. Try that out with 24 grains or 7/8 of an ounce. It worked very well for me, and I think it will work well for you. So that'll do it for today. If you have any questions, we love shotgun questions, so go ahead and get them into us. And in the meantime, between now and then, break them all.
Hey Power Factor fans, I'm Rick. Another trivia question for you, another IDPA rule. This is one that goes back to the dawn of time, or 1996 in IDPA terms. There's a rule that existed for many years that said you are not allowed to lighten a slide by machining except under very limited circumstances of adding cocking serrations, milling the slide for sight dovetails, little sort of inconsequential lightening of the slide that was not done with the intent of lightening the slide. Now the rule, as it was written back in the day, said not only could you not lighten the slide on your gun, but you could not buy and use a factory gun that had similar lightening on the slide. Of course, the reason being, if there was this huge clamoring for a lightened slide, if the only rule that applied was one that applied to modifying your gun after it had been made at the factory, then of course factories could build the gun in any configuration they wanted to, and it would be legal, even if modifying it yourself was illegal. So my question is since October 2013, is the rule about milling holes or material off of the slide with the intent of lightening it, is that legal or is it not legal?